We're talking to Katie Halper this week for our media segment about how maybe for the first time Americans are getting a little bit of diverse perspectives in terms of the coverage of what's going on right now with Israel and Palestine. One example of that was a remarkable CNN interview with one of the Palestinians who's being attempted to be forced out of his home there in Jerusalem. Let's take a listen to some of that.
Your family home is slated for eviction. What is the scene right now?
Well, thank you so much for having me. To start, it's not really an eviction. It's forced ethnic displacement, to be accurate, because an eviction implies legal authority. While the Israeli occupation has no legitimate jurisdiction over the eastern parts of occupied Jerusalem under international law.
How does it feel to have grown up with what you've called the anxiety of dispossession?
It feels familiar because this is what every Palestinian feels like under the crushing fangs of Israeli colonialism in Palestine. I think the myths of self-defense and both sides are growing more and more penetrable. People are being able to see through these myths and call an occupation for what it is and call an aggressor for what it is. I don't expect much of the Biden administration, knowing that Ned Price refused to even condemn the killing of 9 Palestinian children tells me all I need to know. Obviously, I would like the international community to hold Israel accountable under international law, but I also hope free people of the world do their part to push their governments.
Do you support the protests, the violent protests that have erupted in solidarity with you and other families in your position right now?
Do you support the violent dispossession of me and my family?
Pretty incredible moment there at the end, just showing how the framing of this can be very one-sided in terms of the media. As a side note, Muhammad was arrested the very next day. He's obviously incredibly effective and brilliant writer and advocate for his family and for other Palestinians. He got asked the question there, like, what do you want to see from the Biden administration? He says, I have very low expectations. We've already heard Ned Price, the clip we played on this show, refusing to condemn even the killing of Palestinian children. And in fact, he was correct to have very low expectations for the Biden administration. Joe Biden has had a long career of being very one-sided in terms of, support for military aid for Israel without any justification or any strings attached whatsoever. And in fact, Biden has continued that lockstep, unquestioning support with no view toward the human rights of Palestinians in this conflict. Let's take a listen to his comments.
Israel has a right to defend itself when you have thousands of rockets flying into your territory. But I had a conversation for a while with the Prime Minister of Israel, and I think that my hope is that we'll see this coming to conclusion sooner than later.
And in fact, on that front, the U.S. right now blocking a UN resolution that would call for an end to the violence and also pushing back on Israel's attempts to remove these Palestinian families from their homes, which was the spark of this entire conflict. And Saagar, that actually contrasts with the way that Obama, in the final days of his presidency, actually allowed a UN resolution to go through condemning the illegal settlements that Israel has used that have basically, now at this point, the idea of a two-state solution, it's a farce. The facts on the ground, they've pushed and pushed and pushed. They use the rhetoric, all of these people, of a two-state solution while creating facts on the ground that are going to make it impossible for that to ever come to fruition.
It's crazy how much things have changed in American politics, because being anti-settlement was actually the foreign policy of the first Bush administration, and same with the Clinton administration, Oslo Accords and all of that. Basically what happened is that the political dynamics on both sides have changed. The Arab states have completely abandoned the Palestinians, and they literally don't care about them. All the way from Saudi Arabia, even Jordan, all of them. They talk a big game.
That's it.
They do nothing. They care less, and they don't really even care whenever it comes to the diplomatic solution. At the same time, in Israel, their politics have changed dramatically.
Yeah.
So the collapse of the center left, the Rabin and all of them, have allowed Bibi and the large center right to right coalition to come together. Demographics and all of that actually informs a lot of the way that this works too. So that has created a political situation where Bibi not only has no check from the Arab states around him. Because let's be real, like that's what the real threat is, right? Around war, like what was the problem? 6-day war with Egypt or Jordan or in Syria, etc. All of those competitors, so to speak, around them are basically gone. Iran, of course, is there, but they're not actually directly right next to each other. And so the Israeli center-right and right can basically do whatever it wants because they know that it has huge domestic political support here in the United States.
And not only that, but just to add to that, and this is significant in understanding everything that's happening right now and how aggressive the Israeli response has been. What the casualties are up to, I think.
So I have it in here in front of me. So we have the official Palestinian Health Ministry, which I think is run by Hamas, so always take that. 65 people have since Monday, including 16 children, been killed. According to the Israelis, also, 6 Israelis, including 1 child, have died in rocket barrages. So that's where we're at
extremely aggressive response from Israel. It's not to justify violence from Hamas either, although they are, the Palestinians are under an illegal occupation for decades at this point. But, you've got Israel leveling apartment buildings and
that's their military strategy. I actually spent some time there.
Yeah.
They openly will admit it. They'll be like, look, what we do is, it's interesting. I was seeing a thread from Zed Jalani, friend of our show, obviously. And what he was talking about is like, well, part of the thing is Israel makes a big deal about how they like knock on the roof and they like notify and text everybody who's in the building, etc. Which is that what Zed made the point of is that a lot of this is for show in terms of intimidate. And look, like, when you have a superior military, that's generally what you do is you want to crush your enemies. So like, I understand that. But really what it is that whenever it comes to how this is all playing out, I personally, and I've already gotten in trouble for saying this, but I don't really care, which is that I think the greatest mistake Bibi and the Israeli center-right made is they politicized themselves in our politics, right? Like they came to our soil and openly lobbied against the president of the United States and allied themselves with the political party. So, the Israelis and they complain and they're like, well, like how did the left become so anti-Israel? I'm like, you guys came to our country and lobbied and tried to screw with our domestic politics. What do you think is going to happen?
On the other hand, they're paying no consequence for it in terms Biden is more supportive, running more cover for these actions, which again, illegal under internet. Like there's no question about the illegality of this under international law. And as a fact of the matter, if you care about ever having peace between these two parties, which, God, it seems impossible at this point, like these settlements make that increasingly impossible to ever see a path. The Biden strategy he was hoping coming in was to just basically like wash his hands of it and not really do anything. But the political domestic situation on the ground in Israel matters a lot too, which is Bibi's been in political crisis now for quite a long time.
He's like unstoppable though. He always wins.
I know, well, they keep having failing to form a coalition government. And what that has done is that's forced him even more to the right, where he's, having to form a coalition with the furthest right. And you talk about extremists. I mean, these are people who support marching through the street, chanting death to Arabs. These are people who are upfront about the fact that this is essentially an ethnic cleansing, that they want to get rid of Palestinians throughout the state of Israel and have a one-state solution. I mean, that's the type of people that he has teamed up with. And so that's pushed him far to the right. And then the other piece of this is he's, again, in this situation where failed to form a coalition government. So this conflict and appearing strong and rally around the flag and everything, the commentary is also that he's thinking that's going to ultimately serve him politically, which is disgusting.
Yeah, he does. And, to your point, yes, the Biden people are there, but, like, you wouldn't see that interview on TV 10 years ago. There's no way. Just no way. And already, talk to young people in America. The sentiment around Israel ain't the way it used to be.
That's
and once again, I blame them. They are the ones who politicize themselves in our politics, aligning themselves with the GOP on the Iran deal. And it doesn't matter how you think about the Iran deal or not. You can think whatever you like. You can make whatever your speeches. But you come to the United States Congress at the invitation of the opposition party and you make a speech against our president. What do you think is going to happen, man? I mean, you guys are the ones who spelled this forward. So I think that there's a lot of cynicism. Bibi, somehow the guy seems to survive, basically everything. And I also would note, which is that I know some people are watching who'll be upset, and that's fine, which is that, look, in Israel, this is part of the thing that drives me crazy. The way we talk about stuff here is so different than how they talk about it there. I actually spent a decent amount of time in Israel. The Israeli center-left are the ones who are against settlements. Many of them even agree. What is happening? Like, if you go and you at least try to understand their politics in their own context around how they talk about Palestinians, settlements, and more, then we would be so much better off if we could at least try and remove that stigma. Our politics have been hijacked by a lot of different interests and cynically weaponized in the way that we talk about this, and it has removed all attempts at any nuanced discussion around the issue
and it's
whatsoever.
the ultimate version of cancel culture, where if you criticize anything about what the Israeli government's actions are, including illegal settlements, you're anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I know. And that drives me crazy because, once again, that was a mainstream American diplomatic position as recently as 30 years ago. So I don't want to hear it. Okay.
All right, more Rising for you after this.